Welcome everyone. Glad to see you on my channel. Today I will tell you about an unusual story, an amazing story about companionship and love. I wish you a pleasant audience. Mary's first childhood memories were of the big brown sides of the cardboard box that served, she now realized, as her playpen. She was born when her mother, who had given birth to 3 sons in a happy marriage, thought she was going through an early menopause of unrelenting stress. These were difficult times for the country. The factory where the woman worked had been ruined by the managers who had come to work for her. Honest workers did not hesitate to call the directorate traitors and bastards, but people's indignation was simply ignored. Thomas, Emma's husband, was out of work, as were many of the artisans who had become redundant. He tried to find work, but in despair he decided to drive his own car. Emma, as if she had a premonition of bad things to come, persuaded her husband to think of another option. But he did not listen. One night he left and never came back. The body was found a month later. The car was gone, as if it had never existed. Unknown criminals valued a man's life and the happiness of a large and friendly family in an old car, obtained on coupons by Emma's late father. Had it not been for her sons, the woman would hardly have been able to overcome that terrible time. She married her classmate, Thomas, right after graduation, already expecting the birth of her firstborn, and was happy every day they lived together. Her dead husband was her only love. Emma would have liked to follow him, but the boys could not be left as orphans. The woman tried to feed her sons who had lost their father, and she ate through sheer force, feeling disgust at every bite of food that entered her stomach, and not thinking that under her heart a new life was already developing. She wrote off her bouts of dizziness as malnutrition from her lack of appetite. And then Emma was shaken by a terrible hunch. She didn't even have to make a choice. All deadlines for dealing with an unexpected pregnancy were missed. Mary was born, skinny, weak, but with an incredible zest for life. The little girl grew up, and gradually the girl and her brothers were all household chores. Mother loved them, but she simply had no time. She tore at every part-time job she could find. There was no one to take care of Mary's sweet exchange of secrets either. There were no grandmothers in the family, and the only remaining grandfather lived in another area. The eldest of the brothers, Max, was preparing to join the army when she was born. Before that, he was not squeamish about unloading wagons and distributing leaflets. The middle one, Max, was in 3rd grade, and the younger brother had just started school. The boys were not greedy and gave their toys to their sister, but they could not share their clothes. Money was in short supply catastrophically. As a child, Mary dreamed of a new toy for the holidays, but at best she got something extremely practical. For example, new tights, a set of colored pencils and markers, or a new purse. More often than not, however, things came out of someone else's hand. I never want to live like my mother, Mary thought, tormented by her classmates' bullying. I have to get out of this swamp, this hopeless poverty. Why live in a place where your every move is a topic of discussion for others, and at the same time, nobody cares about you? Swallowing her tears, the girl was washing her school uniform in a large basin with a slide on one side because she had been pushed into the mud by an angry class leader. No one was home, which was rare, and Mary did not hold back her emotions. Once again, she involuntarily remembered how the nasty girl had laughed at her. At least wash in puddles, you dirty girl. You'll get cleaner. When I wore this dress, it wasn't this dirty. Mary had nothing to answer. There was no way she would have worn that unfortunate dress. But she just wasn't told where it came from. And it was only because of the snooty classmates' contemptuous gaze that she realized where her mother had gotten the uniform. Of course, there were no rich kids at the school in what had once been a well-to-do working-class village. But even against such an unassuming backdrop, Mary looked worse than the rest. There wasn't much of a problem with sports uniforms. A few suits had been left over from her older brothers, who, however, didn't care much for their preservation. However, it was clearly not new clothes from another's shoulder that caused the smirks of cruel classmates. And now it appeared that the meanest of them all had become yet another benefactress. Mary doubted that she herself had handed the dress to her mother, but that didn't make it any easier. Mary tried not to complain to her brothers, though, and not because they wouldn't respond, on the contrary. Not because they wouldn't listen, on the contrary, but because they wanted to stick up for their little sister from the right side of the fence, and that could cause problems. In today's situation, could not complain, because again distinguished himself nasty Ekaterine, whose father worked in the police, and his mother was in charge of the market. This family had nothing to do with getting Mary's closest people into big trouble. Brian, who once stood up for her and didn't even hit her sister's abuser, but simply dragged the pest by the ear, was immediately put on the children's police register. As Emma was walking home, her way was blocked by a car from which Mary's classmates' parents got out. They warned her that they would not be ceremonious, and if even one more outrage happened, the child welfare authorities would come to her. Katya's mother, looking at her companion as if she were nothing, said in an icy voice, "You should not hurt my little girl. If I'm angry, it will not be enough. You know that you and your offspring are living on the brink of poverty. I feel sorry for you in some human way, but I won't let anyone hurt my daughter. At any moment, under the most plausible pretext of protecting the family and children, I can go to the appropriate authorities, and they, you can be sure, will solve the problem correctly. My husband has very good acquaintances there." Emma looked at the parents of her daughter's classmate and realized with horror that they were really in control of the fate of people in their city. Katya's father put an end to the conversation. "Did you get it all?" Letting out rings of rare smoke directly in the woman's face, calmly and thoroughly threatened him, without raising his voice. "In our city, I have every opportunity to send your offspring to an orphanage, and older sons arrange a very merry life. As far as I know, your middle one is going to join the army in the fall. At my request, of course, he could be sent somewhere hotter. Would you like that?" Emma shook her head so hard that words were superfluous. When she got home, she had a serious talk with her only daughter. Mary listened silently to her mother's confused pleas and seriously promised, "Don't worry, I won't cause any trouble for our boys. I'll deal with them all myself in the meantime. I'll learn to be patient because I don't want you to get upset and cry." The woman hugged her daughter, and they cried in her arms for a short time before her brothers, who were going about their boy's business, returned to the apartment. The girl kept her promise. Outwardly, she stopped resenting the bullying altogether and did not complain to any of her relatives. Seeing the victim's indifference and lack of reaction, Ekaterine even seemed to calm down, but today something came over her again. After some thought, Mary came to the conclusion that a small chocolate bar, a treat that was advertised on television as a heavenly delight, the teacher was the one she helped to write the test unnoticed. But the girl in love with the boy noticed everything and arranged another session of humiliation. Of course, the classmate knew that Mary would not run to complain to anyone. The salary of Max's mother, who worked hard at the construction site, was tight enough for everything she needed, but the apartment was very cramped. The younger children occupied a small room, partitioned by a closet into male and female halves. Max and Sergio lived in a bigger room. There was also a TV, so no one dreamed of any kind of privacy. The older brother could not even arrange his personal life, because times were different. Girls paid more attention to wealth and living space than to character and other qualities. Max was already divorced because his wife's restless mother was constantly on her daughter's mind, repeating that her son-in-law was worthless. The new bride flatly refused to rent an apartment. In the end, the man gave up on everything and, filing for divorce, went back to his mother. Emma suffered, realizing that she couldn't give her children anything but her love. But even to express her tender feelings, sometimes there was no time or energy left. The woman saw that poverty most of all oppressed her daughter, the last gift of her untimely husband. But there was nothing she could do. The girl looked with admiration at the children who came in the summer to visit their older relatives left in the province, and her mother's heart shrank with anxiety for her youngest daughter. As Mary grew older, in her dreams she very realistically imagined that one day she herself would drive to the house in a new luxury car. Of course it would be a foreign car. Of course it would be a foreign car like Catherine's father's, or like the arrogant twin sisters who came to visit their aunt. The girl swore to herself that she would definitely get out of the former workers' camp, where the very atmosphere seemed like a swamp, a nasty swamp. It was only a matter of time before she had to be patient. The last school bell was steadily approaching, and the hope of freedom from bullying loomed. Mary had lately been associating her city with a veritable mousetrap, with not even a piece of cheese as bait, only some sticky and disgusting glue. In the meantime, the only thing left was to wash by hand the dress, stained because of a spiteful classmate, and study as hard as possible to get at least a certificate with good grades to help get a decent job in another, larger and more promising city. She had no ambition to move to the capital, but a neighboring city seemed quite suitable for her. How surprised the girl was when, after graduation, her radiant brothers and mother handed her a sum that was enough to buy her a ticket to the city of her dreams, and for the first time to settle down there. She embraced her family and was not at all afraid of this new phase in her life. On the contrary, Mary longed for it. After the stale values of her small homeland, the big city way of life almost threw her off. She applied by correspondence to several pre-selected colleges, reasoning sensibly that it would be too difficult to study and work at the same time, except that this decision was complicated by the problem of housing. However, Mary, hardened by the trials of life, was not afraid of difficulties. She had money for a few months, and she had no doubt that the salary she would receive would be enough for rent and everything else. Except that the question of employment was in no hurry to be safely resolved. Mary was ready to start her career as an office manager after seeing an ad for enticing numbers. After the interview, however, the illusion dissipated. The girl realized from the hints of her potential employer that she would sometimes have to run quite racy errands, and she refused. Not for that, she got out of the sleepy swamp of her hometown to find herself in the mud. In the end, to blame, the girl got a thank you from a fellow student. After all the searching and running around places where there were vacancies, she got a job as a clerk in a bookstore. She was not afraid of work, but she was not prepared for it. Some customers, and quite respectable looking ones, were eager to steal something past the register. She had to be on edge all the time, and after the resulting shortfall was spread around, Mary was shocked. After the fine, there was virtually nothing left of her paycheck. The girl thought about it, and after quitting, she continued to look for a job, given her sad experience. She did not tell her mother and brothers about her failure, so they would not worry. The girl knew that she would be welcomed home with open arms, but she did not want to embarrass her relatives. By chance, she was hired as a social worker. One day, she just helped pick up food scattered from a heavy bag of a dozing woman on the bus. And the woman, after thanking her, suddenly asked, "Listen, do you maybe need a job?" Seeing both interest and distrust of the fellow traveler, she explained, "Nothing illegal or even dubious. Social service work. The elderly will have to help. Bring groceries, when to clean, help wash, and so on, the little things. However, everything is strictly regulated and not for free. Of course, the work is not the easiest. Instead of thanks, sometimes you get nothing but complaints. But, in any case, it is a noble job to help those who are weak. Of course, you will not scoop up money with a shovel, but at least we have everything stable. Again, if you try hard, you can make it in the first half of the day, and then somewhere else to work or rest. Not that the idea of Irina as the stranger introduced herself seemed very tempting to Maria, but there was simply no other option. The fact that the girl did not even have completed secondary special education was not an insurmountable obstacle. There was an acute shortage of people in the service, and they turned a blind eye to this. At first, the girl would go to the addresses along with a mentor who took over the girl's patronage and taught her the language skills of communicating with the elderly. Officially, they did not pay her much, but she was not going to take the money that her mentees sometimes gave her. First, it was not how she was brought up. Secondly, her more experienced colleagues warned her that it could turn into very big trouble. Even in the beginning, Irene told me. Once an old lady gave me a few rubles. It was kind of out of the goodness of her heart, or rather she just didn't give me change. And then she just forgot about her kind gesture. She made such a scandal by calling my bosses. It's horrible. Since then, I firmly remembered that no additional money from grandparents cannot take. More expensive will be. Yes, even less talk with the mentees, or until the night you will deliver orders. And again there will be dissatisfied. Mary, who had no grandparents, took her job with a heart and tried not to be too formal about her duties and find a kind word for everyone. Once she got used to her new way of life, the girl managed to plan her daily routine rationally and even managed to carve out time and get an extra job at the office that hired people to organize tasting. It was nothing that she had to put up with rudeness and stupid attempts to flirt, responding to all the flirtations with the same prepared phrases. But then you could take the food with you and even give them a treat out of the goodness of your heart. At one of the tastings, Mary met her future husband. He accidentally knocked over a hastily set up advertising stand with his grocery cup. By some miracle, the girl, who survived on her feet, to the surprise of the perpetrator of the incident, neither resented nor made a scene. But some woman, apparently from the store administration, literally flew over to the employee and started yelling at her. "Have you no hands at all? You cannot just fix the mess. There are actually customers walking around here, and you, with your stand, all your blocking." The disgruntled fury imagined herself the queen of the arcade and almost the mistress of the surf maiden in the humble image of the promoter girl, and continued to yell about making amends for the damage inflicted. Finally, the man got tired of watching the scene of unfair humiliation. He clearly and calmly said, sticking up for the confused girl, "Okay, enough of this chaos is my fault. Even though I don't think there's anything wrong with it, I'm willing to make up for, as you said here, the damage done, if you can call the paint stains on the floor that..." At the same moment, Mary's heart trembled. Here in this big city, she so missed the feeling of a strong male shoulder by her side, which she had always felt in her small motherland, thanks to her brothers, ready to stand up for her if necessary. Of course, she tried not to be petty and not to take advantage of their patronage. But how good it was to know that behind your back there was a real wall of family. When the stranger introduced himself as Andrew and offered to meet Mary after her shift was over, she didn't hesitate to agree. A whirlwind of romance swirled, and the girl was over the moon. She thought her lover was the salvation from her loneliness, but she was very mistaken. Andrew tried to squeeze everything possible out of our new life. The first thing he did was insist that the girl move in with him, reasoning, "Why spend money on a rented apartment when mine is now empty and joyless without you?" Also, at Andrew Mary's insistence, she dropped out of school. After all, he affectionately rebuked, "Honey, I don't like the fact that you're always disappearing somewhere. In fact, I am just dying, so jealous of you. How can you be so cruel to me?" Of course, Mary would do anything to please her lover. And just as she had once dreamed, she was no longer threatened by poverty. Andrew was making good money, and now the whole world was open for the girl who had sat in a cardboard box all her childhood. The warm sea of Turkey and the hot deserts of Egypt were a shock for a provincial girl. They even once flew for a weekend to Paris, which the girl had never even dreamed of. Mary, as in her longtime fantasies, spectacularly arrived in her hometown provincial town to introduce Andrew to her closest relatives. However, if the surprised, raised former classmates who saw the girl in an expensive car and with an imposing companion pleased, the reaction of her mother and brothers was a cause for sadness. Emma, left alone with her daughter, whispered that she had better break up with Andrew soon. "Here, trust my maternal instincts. This is not your man. How long have you two been going out? Soon it will be a year, and he only deigned to come here to meet us. He's not serious about you, especially as I understand it, he does not even propose." Mary almost fought with her mother, but deep down in her own heart she was worried about the fact that the man she thought was her fiancé in no way confirmed that status to her family. He introduced himself as a friend. The girl was glad to learn that Sergio was getting married and heartily congratulated her brother and his bride. But she could not answer the direct question. "And at your wedding, when are we going to party?" The atmosphere was not too cheerful. The incident was fueled by the fact that an old yard dog had pawed at the groom's car tire. The more irascible of the brothers almost got into a fight with Andrew when he saw the man outside on the phone, who was coming out to talk on the phone and saw the situation, kicked the dog as hard as he could. Mary's desperate yell stopped the altercation, which almost turned into a hand-to-hand fight, but everyone's mood was ruined. The girl was leaving her relative sad and unhappy. This was not how she had imagined her lover's acquaintance with her mother and brothers. Yes, and Andrew's act surprised her very unpleasantly. Was I so blinded by a love frenzy that I did not even notice in his character such unreasonable cruelty? The girl asked herself and found no answer. A few months after that failed trip, the relationship began to deteriorate. The man began to stay at work more and more often, and when he returned to the apartment, he made claims. Any little thing like a cold dinner would set him off. Andrew didn't make a scene, but he was sure to say something very hurtful in a quiet tone. "You don't think about me at all." That was his mildest rebuke. One morning, eating breakfast prepared by a girl, he announced, "You know, we had better live separately for a while. I leave today for the weekend with business partners, and I ask you to look for an apartment by Sunday. Let's take a time. Out for a month or two, and then we'll get together and see if we still have feelings." The dumbfounded girl didn't even have any words. She walked the guy out and collapsed on the floor in the hallway. The girl did not cry and just sat staring at the wall. This is how Svetlana, her stern, unsuccessful mother-in-law, found her opening the door of her son's apartment with her key. The woman's face lit up with a triumphant smile, and she busily asked, "Are you all ready? Mind you, I'm making sure you don't take anything unnecessary out of my son's house." So after her breakup with Andrew, Mary got exactly nothing. Even the jewelry that the man gave her had to be kept. Even the jewelry that the man gave her had to be kept. Mother made sure that Mary did not touch anything from the shelf where she kept her jewelry in a beautiful box. The woman even demanded that the humiliated girl remove her pendant and other jewelry. "If you thought you would profit at the expense of my son, you were greatly mistaken. I do not know, and do not want to know where you will go now, but do not even dream of robbing his apartment." Maria was disgusted to be in the apartment that she had so lovingly cleaned, where she had so carefully cozied up. The only mercy on the woman's part was the phone, which she allowed the girl to take away. "It's not like I'm some kind of animal. I know that modern girls live in their smartphones, and the model is far from new anymore. Just keep in mind, don't harass my son with calls." In utter prostration, Mary found herself on the street with a small bag of clothes. On her return to her mother's apartment, which she knew would soon have a nephew or niece, the girl didn't even dream of getting an apartment, getting a good job instantly. There was nothing to dream about. Licking through the list of contacts on her phone for nothing to do, she saw the contact Irene and grasped at it like a drowning man at a straw. Try not to cry. She briefly explained to her former mentor and colleague about her predicament, and the girl's timid hope was justified. Her boss had words of encouragement and, most importantly, a job offer for her. There are vacancies now, but it is unlikely that an advance will be given. Of course, you always had a good reputation. But you know, the bureaucracy in our country is stronger than all human relations. By the way, the housing issue may be solved. Okay, this isn't a phone call. Let's meet and I'll tell you everything. Irene, rushing to the addresses of her charges, made an appointment on the street and explained, "Mary, I'm just short of time today. My daughter's grandson is going to school, and I have to take orders and meet him. So I'm sorry, but we'll talk on the run." The girl, having grabbed one of several weighty bags of products from a former colleague, did not mind and listened carefully to the unexpected proposal. "We have a new granny woman is not very old. She was quite active and didn't use the services of social workers until she had an unfortunate fall. Now she is almost bedridden. She needs a live-in nurse. Not many of us agree to such an option. Besides, but the lady is fussy. None of those who agreed with her were satisfied. I can't promise you anything, but I think it's worth a try. You're a neat, respectful, hard-working girl. I think you can do it. And even if the idea does not work, well, as a last resort, social hostel will suit you. It's not exactly fancy, but it's a good place to live. Sorry I'd invite you to my place, but we can barely get along with my mother, in-law as it is. She's already making me bleed to death. And here is such an occasion I will give her." Mary interrupted the woman's apology. "You do so much for me, as it is embarrassing." The woman waved her free hand. "Ah, nothing. Uncomfortable is sleeping on the ceiling. Everything else is perfectly normal. You know, the more I think about it, the more I think that you would be perfect for Paulina. I'll introduce you to her today, and then we'll go to the office to get you officially employed. Is that okay, or do you have somewhere to be today?" Delighted at the light at the end of the tunnel of life, Mary vigorously assured her that she was completely satisfied and hoped that she would like the older woman and find at least a temporary home. The supervisor entered the apartment, and after a brief report of what groceries she had bought, introduced Mary to her. "Alice, this is Mary. She used to work for us, and now she's coming back to social services. The girl is very responsible, just very, and most importantly, she can live with you and help with all the things you do." Alice, half lying on the bed, at first glance made Mary confused. So attentively was she studying her that she didn't seem to listen to Irina's promotional speech. Then the potential ward asked, "I hope you understand that I'm not an evil landlady who will drive you to the back and forth. There won't be many demands, but remember, no strangers can be brought into my apartment. That's the main rule, and I won't ask you to break it." Mary assured her that she was not going to bring anyone into the house and asked, "If I am suitable for you, may I leave my things to take my documents to work?" The woman said perplexedly, "Come on, are you going to put all your belongings in one bag? Can you start work today?" The girl nodded. "Yes, as it happens, this is all my stuff, and I can start work as soon as I take the documents to the office. I have experience in this kind of work, as you said, but I had a little break." The old lady shrugged her shoulders and gave her caregiver her first working instructions as to what she would like for dinner. Irene rejoiced. "That's good. Alice, I assure you, you won't repent for a second. Our Mary is pure gold, even if it doesn't sparkle." It didn't take long for the formalities of applying for the job to go through. In addition to Alice, Mary received several other addresses and rejoiced at the successful beginning of her life without Andrew. She hurried to the ward with whom she was now to live. Alice was quite sympathetic to Mary's culinary skills and was not as capricious as she had secretly feared. Towards the end of dinner, the woman asked for tea and suddenly asked her nurse, "Look, you do not hesitate to eat whatever you want. In fact, let's bake an apple pie tomorrow. I have this recipe. It just melts in your mouth. And my oven's not too fussy, so it's easy to make. I can even knead the dough myself. It's nothing complicated, almost like Charlotte, but with a few nuances, and I have apples in the fridge too. B. I asked Irene last week to bring it. The girl was surprised that the woman had taken to her so quickly and did her best to justify her confidence. Gradually, Mary and her mentee began to communicate wonderfully. The girl was actively studying the literature on rehabilitation, and after talking to the physiotherapist recommended by Irene, she patiently gave massages and persuaded Alice to do physical exercises. The woman herself was aware that recovery would require overcoming discomfort, but with the support of the nurse, it was easier to do so. The girl distracted her with talk and literally put her shoulder on her shoulders, and things slowly moved toward recovery. One evening, unbeknownst to herself, over tea and what had become a traditional pie, Mary told Alice the story of her short life. The woman was silent, and then she spoke words of comfort. You know, it's even good that his mother showed her characters too. You saved a lot of time by not contacting that family. They would have taken the soul out of you. Haven't you noticed that you've turned into a handy housekeeper? With whom? Of course, it's nice to spend the night, have a nice meal, and come to a cozy apartment. I'm sure that soon your ex will start biting his elbows when he suddenly realizes that everything you did for him suddenly has to be assigned to other people. If he starts to take steps to get you back, send him away. Traitors shouldn't get a second chance. Mary blushed. For Alice, as if she had read her mind, like 1,000 abandoned lovers, the girl secretly hoped that her ex would pine for a reunion, looking for a meeting and dreaming of a reunion. The mistress looked at the nurse carefully and understood everything on her face, but she did not repeat the lecture. She knew by experience how hard it was to accept other people's advice in personal matters. The days ran their course, and there was no friction in the relationship between the nurse and her ward. Gradually, thanks to Mary's efforts, Alice began to walk. At first, it was small trips around the room. Then the woman walked around her apartment and began to go outside with the support of her caregiver. In the good weather in the evenings, they enjoyed taking walks. They didn't even need to talk to feel comfortable when it got much better. And she honestly didn't need the services of a caregiver anymore. Mary, Alice asked worriedly, am I disturbing you? You are quite recovered now. And if I have to, I'll start looking for an apartment. The woman laughed and then explained, intercepting the surprised look. You are very interesting, and I do not feel alone. However, untie you to myself will not. I know that your salary is not too big, so now that I am much less cared for, you can change the field of activity. Just don't be in a hurry to take the first job that comes along. Better yet, what if you get some kind of degree? You're still very young, and there's no hurry. The year flew by unnoticed, and in the midst of the hustle and bustle, Mary was doing well. She'd put her efforts into her education from the get-go. Out of the blue, in a phone conversation with her mother, Mary learned some disturbing news. The local doctors had no way of knowing what was going on with the woman and referred her for further examination at the regional hospital. Emma had to come to town and stay somewhere because it was impossible to do all the necessary tests and examinations in one day. Alice heard Mary calling the hotel to clarify the terms of the reservation. And when the girl finished talking, she asked directly, "Who are you looking for a hotel room?" "Whether you're looking for a hotel room. She's always worried about me and my brothers." And this is the result. My heart began to falter. She needs a medical consultation after she's been tested with more advanced equipment. Not for the first time, Alice surprised the girl. Okay, so stop wasting your time with nonsense. Let your mom live here, that way she'll have support. In fact, she'll see how you live and she'll feel better. She probably thinks you're in some kind of bondage. We'll get to know her, and then we'll have one less thing to worry about." Mary didn't even know how to express her gratitude to her ward and simply walked over and gave the woman a big hug. The introduction went beautifully. The landlady was friendly and very accommodating, and the women, though they were of different generations, easily reached an understanding. Emma went through all the doctors, and to her great joy there were no particularly difficult problems. On leaving, the woman heartily thanked me. "Thank you for being so kind to Mary. It's so rare." The landlady hugged her back and whispered, "I'm so glad I got to know Mary. She's wonderful. I even feel that the apartment is brighter and more comfortable. Thank you, Emma, for raising such a daughter. Thank you for the kind words. But I can't take all the credit. I had no time to bring up my daughter. I was trying to make money. Let's just see how it all worked out." If the woman was worried about her daughter, who had not made a career in the big city and became a nurse, now she did not worry. Parting with Mary at the train station, Emma asked, "Daughter, hang in there, Alice. This is exactly the kind of grandmother I wanted for my children, but it was not destiny. But now you have the opportunity to communicate with a wise woman who is kind to you, and that is worth a lot. Even if you have a personal life wakes up, do not forget about it. Come and visit, be supportive." Mary was in agreement with her mother that getting to know Alice was a great success, and hastened to assure her there are no romances now. It hurts too much to break up. The girl unwittingly betrayed her worries because sometimes she was attacked by a helpless longing for Andrew. She herself was ashamed of this feeling, but she could not overcome herself. Even in a big city, the probability of meeting a person with whom she had fond feelings again was quite high. And Mary had not escaped that fate. She encountered Andrew in the truest sense of the word. As she walked into the drugstore, the man, on the other hand, was walking out the door and glowered when he saw his ex-girlfriend. "Just this morning I remembered you. See how much I missed you. That same day we met. Look, you buy what you need. I'll wait for you here on the street. We'll have a little chat." The unexpected meeting made the girl very nervous, even though she sometimes just wanted to see Andrew for a second, just until she could grind her teeth. However, when the dream became a reality, her greatest desire was to hide or run away. In the drugstore, unfortunately, Mary had the only way out, and the girl involuntarily had to find herself again in the company of the man who, together with her mother, explained to her former lover, from the bottom of her heart, where to go, how best to choose a medical professional. But the man interrupted her. "Look, I don't even know why I burdened you with my problems. Don't worry, I'll take care of it myself. Honestly, I'm just looking for an excuse to hang out with you longer." Mary apologized and said she had to go. But Andrew was so insistent that he drove her to the college where she was headed and insistently invited her to meet him. As a result, the girl did not listen to the teachers at all, and when she returned home, everything began to fall out of her hands. She remembered the details of her meeting with Andrew. She cooked a dinner and didn't pay attention to the looks Alice gave her. At last the woman could not stand it anymore and called out to her, "Mary, you've already been in front of me 5 times in the last 2 minutes to pickle the potatoes. What is the matter with you today? Are you in love or what?" Mary confessed that she had run into her former lover and summed up her impressions of the meeting. "Andrew was so nice to me and drove me to college. He invited me to meet him sometime in a more romantic place. In general, I thought that all my feelings burned out. But when I saw him, I realized that I was wrong. I still care about him, especially when he started saying that he missed me. I was just ready to throw myself on his neck." I don't know how Alice held back and listened without interrupting. But when her caregiver finished her agitated speech, she said like a nag, "He's Andrew, yours is a traitor, a scoundrel, and the opportunist. He just figured out very quickly that after getting close to you, He'd get free care for himself and his mother. Don't even think he was being so nice just because of his suddenly awakened feelings. He was too comfortable with you, and he wants that carefree time back. Don't be silly, don't rush to argue with me. When you think through the whole situation without emotion, you'll see that I'm right. Mary did ask, as if she hadn't been listening to the woman who had become her older friend. Maybe we should give Andrew a second chance after all. Alice's reaction was unexpected. The woman jumped up from the chair she was sitting in and began to threaten the girl with her finger. Don't you dare, don't you think? Forget it. No chance should be given to traitors. Mary, who had never seen her ward in such a flustered state, was a little frightened and began to gently reassure Alice. Don't worry that way. I'm not the naive girl I was a year and a half ago anymore. It's just that things have stirred up so much in my heart that I seem to be completely confused. Alice, who drank the glass of water handed to her and managed to get her emotions under control, slumped back in her chair in exhaustion after a vivid outburst of indignation, and spoke. I was a little older than you when I married Michael. He was handsome. Couldn't take my eyes off him. But as my grandmother used to say, a handsome husband is a stranger's husband, and he cheated on me for the first time on our honeymoon. We were in a sanatorium. I fell asleep in my room. After dinner, I woke up and Vova wasn't there, so I went to look for him. There were no cell phones before. I thought my husband must have gone to the sea. And I was not mistaken. My beloved was on the shore. Only he was not alone enjoying the noise of the surf, but in the company of a girl. The situation was unambiguous. They were sitting there kissing. Can you imagine how I felt? And Mary, astonished by such a revelation, Alice did not even find something to say. And the woman continued her confession. Oh, how angry I was. I screamed, and he made excuses that he was crazy. And in general, he only loves me. The lady who was with him left, and I let him talk me into believing that I was the only one that really mattered to him. We made up, even though it wasn't easy for me. But like you have now decided to give it a second chance. The rest of the honeymoon went so well that I had no doubts about my decision. My husband was helpful, and without exaggeration carried me in his arms. In fact, he picked me up and dragged me. In general, I calmed down, and I even began to think that it was very good that such an adventure had taken place. I thought that now he would not look at the other side. I was glad telling everyone what a wonderful husband I had. Mary could see that the woman was having a hard time with the story and tried to change the conversation by asking her about what she would like to see on the breakfast table. Alice, however, was determined to let her caregiver friend know the whole story. In all, me and him lived pretty well. His father was a big shot, and about 6 months after the wedding, he got his son a separate apartment with all the amenities. This is where you and I are talking now. So it turned out that my in-laws didn't hesitate to come over to our place to have a bath. My sister and mother came by several times a week. My husband didn't protest. In fact, that was the custom back then. I didn't see anything wrong with that. On the contrary, I was even glad that I wasn't losing contact with my family and that my close people were becoming my own. A year later, I got pregnant. I dreamed about how everyone would nurse our baby and how much fun our house would be. I made God laugh with my plans. Michael cheated on me again. And that's not the end of it. Mary began to worry about the elderly woman, who was practically crying, remembering the past. But the woman rejected the offer to rest and concluded her sad story. It so happened that I was supposed to go to the antenatal clinic, but the appointment was canceled. Since the clinic was near my husband's work, I decided to go see him. He was sitting in a separate office, and I entered without knocking to see a picture that I still have nightmares about. My husband was having fun with my own little sister. It was the meanest thing I'd ever imagined. Either I was too trusting or I didn't want to notice. I was incredibly desperate. As I stood on the threshold, I collapsed without feeling. I came to myself on a chair. My sister was sitting opposite Volodya beside him, her cheeks red, begging her mother not to tell. And I wanted to leave, but my legs felt as if they had fallen off. I can't stand, and I can't breathe from the pain. In general, even now, it is difficult for me to talk about it. I lost a child in the hospital. The entire staff was fed up with my husband. He came daily or even several times a day, but I didn't even want to see him. He would walk into the room, and I turned my back against the wall. He would start turning me over, and I closed my eyes and covered my ears, so I wouldn't see or hear him. My sister came with my mother, and they all talked me into forgiving my husband. I said in my heart what had caused my tragedy, and the loss of my tragedy, and the loss of my child. Except, what do you think? My mother sided with my sister. Her youngest daughter had always been like a light in the window for her. Started explaining to me that she didn't mean to hurt me, much less mean anything bad, but was just confused. My mother begged me to forgive, begged me not to be angry with my sister. Only I felt even physically disgusted with her and with my husband. I could not understand them. How could they take advantage of my gullibility? Surely they must have lied to me and giggled. All in all, they became real traitors to me. I stopped all communication with them. As my mother did not ask me to reconcile, I could not forgive such a thing. I closed my eyes and saw this picture. Nothing helped. When they were divorcing, Michael didn't share the apartment with me and checked out. He probably expected me to forgive him for this grand gesture, but he was wrong. I didn't want to see him again, and I didn't want to see him again, and I didn't. Through my mother, he and my sister sent me an invitation to their wedding. I can't remember how I threw the carafe of water against the wall. It flew apart so badly that I almost got splinters from my mother and me. I never saw my husband or my sister again, except for seeing my mother off for her last journey. But I did not speak to them on that sad day either. I knew they had children. My nephews. So, Mary asked in surprise, "You did take an interest in the lives of your ex-husband and sister?" The older woman grinned. I didn't even think. Their children, my joint nephews, showed up on my doorstep about 10 years ago. I was still working then and so tired that at first I thought someone I knew had sent them to me. Word of mouth. It always turned out to be the best advertising for me. Anyway, I took them to the apartment. How would I know what they wanted from me? She laughed. It's almost like a movie. "Hello, Auntie. We're your nephews. Please love and cherish. The paperwork said to be my sister and my ex-husband's sons and Tom. Now it turns out the nephews needed a place to live. Their father, my ex-husband, had once gotten an apartment with me. So they decided it was my time to share. I didn't explain to them in detail what scoundrels their parents were. Why spoil the beautiful memory picture? What's more, they would hardly believe me. Already at the door. Alice pointed out, becoming silent. Apparently, the mental excursion into the past was even more difficult than Mary had thought at the beginning of the conversation. The girl waited patiently, not daring to break the silence, and with her inner gut she knew. And this was not the end of the story. Homie's sister called me as soon as she got the number. She said that after my husband died, we had nothing to share. As if it was time to let go of old grudges and get back together. She urged me to act on my conscience. There were no pockets in the funeral, she said, and nothing could be taken with me. Only in vain, she said, I had no one else in the world. In vain. Maybe there would be one more day in the aggregate when I would forget about my child, born prematurely dead, but no more. Besides, after this tragedy, I lost the chance to be a mother altogether. And every damn day and night I imagined how happy I would have been if not for these traitors. As a result, I stopped communicating with all my relatives, without exception. The woman was crying, no longer trying to hide her tears, and Mary did not know what words could comfort Alice now. The girl realized that her ward had voiced such gloomy memories, only to warn her against taking a rash step toward forgiving Andrew. She was imbued with the tragic story of a woman who had lost her husband and her sister, the dearest of all, through meanness. Of course, Mary had no evidence that Andrew had had affairs with someone else in parallel with her, and that she was not his wife. However, the girl seemed to have grasped the meaning of Alice's story. The next time she saw Andrew at her college, Mary mentally ordered herself not to rejoice. On reflection, the girl admitted to herself that the man saw her only as a convenient domestic servant, not a woman he wanted to go through life with. Besides, she had the worst memories of her association with her mother. So Mary simply and calmly told the man who handed her the bouquet, "Listen to me and hear me. I don't want to see you." With the girl walked away from Andrew, trying to walk calmly and not to break into a run, but he did not think of catching up with her. Late that night, Mary allowed herself to mourn her first failed love, which was now definitely behind her, and the man no longer bothered her much. It had been nearly 3 years since Mary had had her fateful encounter with Alice. They were still living together and had long since moved from a business relationship to one of almost kinship. Several times Emma visited her daughter at Alice's apartment, and all with great pleasure they chatted. 2 weeks before her birthday, Alice suddenly said to Mary, "Listen, how do you feel about getting together in big company? I don't have many friends. There was your neighbor Nina, your mother Emma, and your co-worker." The ward suggested that Mary invite her family and her brothers and their own children and wives to visit. Mary was surprised. The woman didn't have much respect for her private holiday, and the first time she had congratulated her on her birthday, she had only grimaced, showing with all her appearance how uncomfortable she was with the reminder that she was getting older. Although Alice's wish to celebrate an anniversary was strange, the girl did not dare object and jokingly replied, "The wish of the hostess is the law. I think no one will refuse. Besides, I'm sure my mother can come early and help with the cooking of the meal." After informing her relatives of the upcoming celebration to which they had been invited, everyone started working on the menu. Despite the difference in age, they understood each other at a glance, and the hectic task did not make them tired. They were interested in inventing the concept of the feast. And Mary started shopping for groceries the very next day after the unexpected conversation. Emma rushed to help set the table a few days before the celebration, and the 3 women in the kitchen worked surprisingly well together. Alice looked fondly at Mary, who was deftly wielding kitchen utensils and not hiding her emotions. The rapidly approaching feast was also very fun and family-like. The guests arrived in a friendly company, and after everyone got acquainted, no one felt superfluous or neglected by the hero of the occasion. Alice was happy and constantly smiled at the guests, finding kind words for everyone in response to congratulations. The day was endless, because everyone shared their emotions, funny stories, and could not get enough of talking. The friendly brothers, without collusion and without a request, managed to fix the leaky faucet in the kitchen and bathroom, to grease the screaming door hinges, even to fix the iron. However, like all good things, the holiday came to an end. Everyone said goodbye to good friends and said almost in chorus that we should meet more often. A week passed after the holiday when Alice asked Mary to sit down and listen to her carefully. To the baby girl, "I have no one dearer to me than you. I guess I'm not the worst person, if fate gave me the gift of meeting you. I'm happy that one day I brought you to me, and you and I met. I liked your relatives very much, too. I realized what a family of people who are really close to each other, even if they live most of their lives at a distance. Anyway, I thought for a long time and decided that I want to leave my apartment to you. Remember, I went for a walk alone last week. Anyway, I went to the notary. The one who sits at the end of the building next door. This nice woman explained to me all the nuances in plain language and gave me some useful tips. Anyway, I made you a deed of gift for the apartment, and I also wrote a will. Both documents are kept at the notary, and when my time comes, go straight there. Understand? The girl was taken aback by this information and became indignant. What are you making up? Your time isn't coming anytime soon. You could say that everything is just beginning. So you're obviously in a hurry. The woman looked at her caregiver, turned in fact into her closest relative, and sighed, asking, "So be it, but promise that, if anything, you will certainly go to the notary. Promise. And one more thing. Listen carefully to where I have everything for my last farewell, and don't interrupt." Mary nodded, so as not to upset her dear one, and listened silently to all the instructions. Her heart was uneasy after this conversation, but the girl shook off the misgivings. I guess Alice was just tired of all the Jubilee fuss. Everything went on, and the caregiver began to settle down. However, less than a month later, Mary returned from work to discover that her older friend had died. With the organization of sad ceremonies, helped reliable Irene, who strongly supported a completely confused colleague. The girl sobbed on her shoulder and blamed herself for not dragging Mary to the doctors after the strange conversation. "It's my fault for not insisting on a full medical examination. There's a reason she had such a strange conversation with me. She didn't seem to be feeling well, but she didn't tell me so she wouldn't bother." Irene wiped her tears and tried to comfort her. Then she could not stand it anymore and burst into tears. Not many people came to see the woman off. Mostly neighbors gathered around the entrance. Emma stood with her daughter, who was incredibly sad, and realized that her Mary was seeing off not just a good friend, but the woman who had replaced her grandmother. The mood of many was depressed. Not long ago they had honored the deceased at a jubilee, and now they were seeing her off to her last journey. There was something wrong, unfair, and very hurtful about it. After her mother left, the girl sank into a strange state. Mary continued to go to work and study, but did everything that was required of her purely mechanically. All emotion was muted. Going back to the empty apartment was very strange. Mary hoped that everything would one day turn out to be a normal nightmare, but death was a reality. One evening, as the girl sat poring over the pages of a photo album to find a photo for a future monument, the doorbell rang. The man who came in introduced himself as Alice's nephew Tom. He defiantly put his foot on the threshold so that Mary would listen to him after all, and tried to intimidate him. "I don't know what kind of scam you pulled and how you managed to gain the trust of my beloved aunt, but I won't leave it at that. My brother and I will find you out. Our parents are out of this world now, and we are first in line for my aunt's inheritance. You're the nurse, so sit somewhere far away. Stay out of the way from here." Mary couldn't stand such a brazen lie and quipped, "Oh, yes, I noticed how fervently you loved your aunt. You didn't bring a single packet of medicine. What's that about? I haven't seen you or your brother in 3 years. Not even to the funeral. Although I personally sent you a message with information about the date and time of farewell." The flushed guest decided to intimidate the girl by jumping on her and spitting under her feet. At this point, the girl remembered that shortly before her death, the deceased had asked her not to delay in going to the notary. The girl inadvertently wished the unpleasant visitor a good morning, and while he was bewildered, she closed the door. She had to pull herself together and carry out what she had promised. The procedure for reading a will was not at all like what they show in movies and soap operas, but the silence that arose after the old lady's will was read was capable of rivaling any climax. According to the text of the will, the caregiver received a deposit in the bank as well as all the property in the apartment. Tom looked at the girl triumphantly. "Here it is, Justice. The apartment goes to my brother and me. So, since we're kind, we'll give you a day to pack, though we could go and change the lock right now." The notary tapped the table with the tip of her pen and asked, "Qu'on est more minute? Attention." Alice left one more document. She drew up a deed of gift. "So, man, no need to threaten the owner of the apartment," Stowe managed to hold back his brother, who almost lunged at the girl with his fists and asked the notary, "What about compulsory inheritance?" The woman looked at him carefully and clarified, "Actually, the man whom my brother kept interrupting, explaining, the deceased is the older sister of our late mother, so you understand that she is our own aunt. Alice had no children. It turns out that we are her only blood relatives. Everything should come to us." The notary did not agree with this opinion of the visitor and explained, "So far, I do not see any legal basis for you to consider yourself heirs. The respected one was in her right mind when she was drawing up the documents, and she acted without any compulsion from outside." Anticipating the men's displeasure, the notary raised her hand, urging them to be silent, and added, "If you have any complaints, I advise you to behave within the legal framework and go to court. Do you understand? Then everyone except Maria should go out." The woman told the girl everything she would have to do, and at the end of the meeting advised her wholeheartedly, "Just in case, you should change the lock on the door. You never know what these irascible relatives will think up. By the way, if they suddenly filed a lawsuit, it is better to hire a lawyer. It will be easier and more peaceful." The notary attached a business card to the documents. "This woman specializes in property cases, and she has a lot of experience, although, to be honest, your case is not too complicated. Everything is perfectly drawn up, but, it's better to be on the safe side." The girl continued to live in the apartment because she simply had nowhere else to go and was waiting daily for a catch from her nephews. After a few months, however, the girl calmed down, and that's when the subpoena came in her name. She didn't want to face Tim and Tom again. Mary used the services of a lawyer advised by a notary, and she didn't even have to go to court herself. She simply wrote a power of attorney, and after the hearing, she met with the lawyer and learned the happy news that she had won. The case had been won. The arrogant nephews were left with nothing. And the girl finally was able to breathe easy. Life was gradually entering a new rut where she did not have her good patroness, and Mary desperately lacked a conversation with a wise woman. The girl tried not to get attached to any of the wards anymore, and then she decided to leave the service altogether. Her boss supported Mary in this decision. Mary took a short break between quitting her job and getting a new job and went to visit her family. She just wanted to be around people she cared about and feel their support. The small-town atmosphere seemed even more lingering in contrast. But now she was enjoying that peace of mind. She no longer wanted to prove anything to anyone. And even the news that an old classmate had sunk to the bottom of her life and become a highway harlot evoked no emotion except pity. Mary was told this news by the driver of the cab, which the girl had hired so as not to carry gifts in her hands to her mother and the rest of the numerous household members. The man, who was squinting at the passenger, very soon couldn't stand it and asked, "Don't you recognize me at all?" The girl, whose only thoughts were of the upcoming meeting, looked closely and recognized her classmate. During the trip, she had learned practically all the news of the city, as if she had read a brief summary of the news of the past few years. The fates of several other classmates were sad. And if, in some cases, the sad ending was predictable, the fall of Catherine was a surprising event for the girl. However, she didn't even want to gloat. Her priorities had changed too much in the past few years. When the cab stopped at the right house, the girl did not refuse the help offered by a classmate. The man, whose appearance was now barely identifiable as a conscientious teenager, carried the bags to the apartment door and offered, "Look if you want." Let me organize a gathering of all our people who are still normal. Mary did her best to refuse as politely as possible. The classmate, whose name she never remembered, became visibly sad and said goodbye. The family greeted the girl with shouts of joy, and while she handed out gifts, the house was incredibly noisy. After the excitement subsided and the joint dinner was over, Mary and her mother went out for a walk. The girl had been deprived of such luxuries as a child, and now enjoyed simple companionship. They walked in silence, and then Mary asked for advice. I don't know what I should do next. It seemed that when Alice was at home, everything was clear, and the routine has become so familiar that I am having a hard time getting used to living without my, though not native by blood, but such a dear grandmother. I sit and wait for her to come up to me and say something. Maybe I should sell my apartment and come back here. Emma was as surprised as if she had been told that the planet Earth was flat after all, and asked again, Or you what? Are you contemplating coming back to our sleepy town for good? What about your dream, your ambition, your graduation, finally? I understand that this is a very difficult time for you, but you just have to get through this period. It always happens when the people you love are gone forever. You just have to find the strength, set goals, and continue to live for yourself and for those who are dear to you. It's hard, but it's doable. When I was widowed at 35, I was so confused. I still don't know how I coped with everything. Of course, there's no way to measure the depth of grief. But I think you feel better now than I do. I lost my husband back then, and I somehow had to feed my 3 sons and take care of myself so that you would be born healthy. Although, to be honest, I wanted to just lie down and sleep forever. For you, I understand, she was a close person, but she still lived a long life. And in addition, she left you all her possessions so that you need as little as possible. All in all, you are now an enviable bride. It remains only with the choice of the groom not to make a mistake. Grandmother has taken care of the rest. Of course, if you want, you can sell the apartment there and move here. There's enough money left over. But you know that there are no jobs or any kind of development here. At least men are somehow employed, and women are only left with trade and all sorts of budgetary institutions where the salaries are small. Look, do you want this kind of life? The conversation with my mother helped me cope with my melancholy and put my thoughts in their proper place. Yes, it was easier for her than for my mother, and the availability of an apartment in a provincial town allowed her not to spend money on rented accommodation and not worry about looking for a job to her liking. Of course, it was good to see her relatives, but Mary, having thought about it, did not stay at home. The memory of a semi-impoverished existence pushed forward and did not allow to give up. The girl, after thinking about all the options, decided to get a job at one of the closest to home cafes as a manager. She succeeded, and, indirectly thanks to her mentee, the hostess of the institution turned out to be her longtime acquaintance and recognized her. Tai saw you at the funeral and noticed that you were really crushed by grief. It's so rare for a stranger to be so close. If you agree, you can start work next week. Thanked her new boss and, full of the happiest hopes, went home. That was what she now mentally called the apartment. No sooner had she walked halfway home than an unknown man snatched her purse from her hands and rushed off. She rushed after him, but there was practically no chance. She wore stilettos to the interview that kept her from picking up speed. Unexpectedly, one of the passers-by tripped the bully and handed the purse that had fallen out to the hostess. Mary began to thank the indifferent guy. Thank you very much. I had all my documents in the bag and I already thought that that was it. I would have to restore them. The young man smiled charmingly and shrugged and said, You know, I've always wanted to be in the shoes of brave heroes who help beautiful ladies. So Sir Knight at your service, my dear madam. The tension released Mary. She crouched with laughter and supported the wordplay. No one has ever called me that. And your title, dear sir, is not the most usual either." Soon they met. Dennis told him that he was 26 years old and a freelance artist. "You see, I don't have a working day as such. There is inspiration. I create, and without too much modesty, quite well." The girl wondered, and if suddenly there is no inspiration, what then? But the boy was unperturbed and answered, "Then I wander around the city, waiting for a miracle. Today it happened. I met you." He insisted on walking her home, and she agreed. The next day, the new acquaintance was waiting for her outside. "So, I want to paint your portrait, and I hope you won't refuse." While Mary posed, the free artist kept sketching something and making her laugh, making her smile as hard as she could. And then, as if remembering something, he became sad. The girl decided to ask him cautiously, "Is everything all right with you?" Dennis nodded. "Almost everything. I had a fight with the Joys yesterday, and now I'll have to show character and not call first. Besides, I have no place to live again." She made an unexpected proposal to a new acquaintance. "So I have a spare room in my apartment. If you want, stay at my place." Mary, burned by a man's betrayal, tried not to get attached to the lodger. But she noticed that the artist was different from her former lover for the better, and she seemed to feel sympathy. He made a habit of picking her up from work and giving her fascinating tours of the city he knew like the back of his hand. Dennis was fun to spend time with, but something kept them from getting close. They lived in the same apartment as good neighbors. And so far, it was the easy, friendly relationship and informative walks that suited the girl after another day of work that turned out to be incredibly difficult. One day she woke up to a whisper, and perhaps if not for the caregiver's habit of listening to everything that was going on in the apartment, she would have gotten into a lot of trouble. Dennis was on the phone with someone in a disgruntled tone, and the girl could barely contain herself from screaming. "I keep telling you, Tom, this thing is untrustworthy. What's the matter with her? She's wild. I try to touch her, like to make the light fall well for the drawing, and she doesn't respond. But don't worry, the domestication process is progressing. There's nothing complicated about it. We'll get her property." Mary didn't hear what Tom, who must have been the disgruntled nephew, was answering. The girl was shocked and did not understand how she could not see the mercantilism of Dennis, who had a clear plan for her property, and all the conspirators might have succeeded if it had not been for the nurse's habit, even in a half-dream, of analyzing everything that was going on around her. Now the girl had only to wait for the moment when the artist left her apartment and put out all his belongings, and also to call her brothers for reinforcements. Mary understood that her nephews were not going to retreat and decided to consult how they could be overpowered, trying not to meet Dennis's eyes. The girl left for work in the morning, as usual. From where she called her brothers, Mary got off work and made sure the artist wasn't in the apartment, let her brothers inside. They got busy changing the lock, and Max and his sister raked Dennis's things into one big pile, and then they unceremoniously put them in a garbage bag. When Dennis, after not waiting for Mary at the coffee shop, called her on the phone, she said in a hoarse voice that she was sick, so she had left work early. The man arrived half an hour later and unable to open the door with his key. Sensed something was wrong. He was about to flee, but Mary's brothers were right and apprehended the accomplice of his overzealous nephew. He became very frightened and agreed to go to the police and testify against Tom and Tim, who had decided to use him as a live wire to trap Mary and deprive her of the property he had given her. The girl felt sick to her stomach, but the brothers quickly cheered her up. Tom and Tim, who had come to ask Mary for reconciliation, looked very pathetic indeed. She would have felt sorry for them, but they spared no one. The only thing that saved the men was that they were actually related to Nana, and Mary didn't want her dearly remembered name being coddled in court, and then in the city streets and in the houses. In the woman's memory, the caregiver forgave Tom and Tim, and even Dennis. It would seem that after what had happened, the girl should have withdrawn into herself. But the plot was exposed, and it was as if she had ordered herself not to think about the past. She had everything to live happily, and the experience helped her not to make mistakes with men anymore. A few years after her grandmother's death, Mary successfully married and fulfilled all her naive childhood dreams of happiness.